Greetings, VFI News supporters and anyone else watching this video report. Don't forget to let your friends and family know all about it. Now, just when we thought we couldn't get any more outraged here in Israel, an act of terrorism in the heart of Washington, D.C. took two of our most promising young people away from us. The man who murdered them appears to have been heavily influenced by the tsunami of anti-Israel rhetoric coming from all over the political and ideological spectrum. Meanwhile, back in Israel, the military effort known as Operation Gideon's Chariots, meant to finally defeat Hamas and free the remaining hostages, is already yielding results. Something that is not yielding results are the nuclear negotiations with Iran. Those negotiations are going nowhere fast, but both sides seem to find them useful for different reasons, so for now I guess they'll continue. Meanwhile, in Syria, the regime of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani is cracking down on both Hezbollah and Palestinian terrorist groups, while in a gesture to President Trump, they handed over to Israel the records of Eli Cohen, the spy known for generations as Israel's man in Damascus. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. We start this week's report with last Wednesday's terrorist attack at the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., which resulted in two fatalities, Yaron Lishinsky and his girlfriend and soon-to-be fiancée, Sarah Milgram. They were attacked as they left the Capitol Jewish Museum on Wednesday evening after attending an event hosted by the AJC, the American Jewish Committee, along with two other people who have not been identified, but according to Israeli officials, they were also wounded in the attack. According to publicly available reports, the sequence of events went like this. The attacker, 31-year-old Elias Rodriguez, is a resident of Chicago who had come to D.C. with the intention, premeditated, of carrying out an attack on Israelis, according to his own admission. He bought a ticket to the event at the museum that evening, but according to security guards, he did not enter the building. Instead, he waited outside on the street for some people to come out, and when these four young people emerged from the building, he decided that they were the people he'd come there to attack. So he pulled out a 9mm pistol and opened fire. Security cameras caught him firing 21 rounds, reloading once when he ran out of bullets. The cameras also show his victims attempting to crawl away after being initially wounded, but he bent over and shot them several more times. Evil. It was not dissimilar to what the attackers of Hamas did on October 7, 2023, right down to the fact that these murdered people were both active in efforts to bring peace and reconciliation between Israelis and the Palestinians. Now, I'm sorry to say all that because I'm sure Rodriguez would be pleased at the comparison. How do I know that? Because of what happened next. After making sure his victims were no longer alive, Rodriguez threw his pistol into the bushes and then incredibly ran inside the museum. Security guards assumed he was a distraught witness and offered him water. But then he pulled out a red checkered keffiyeh and announced that he had committed his evil deeds for Palestine, for Gaza, and he asked the security guards to call the police so he could be arrested. The police, who had already been on their way, soon arrived, and indeed he was arrested. As the police were putting the handcuffs on him, and with cameras rolling, he called out, "Free, free Palestine," twice, and then he was led away. It was later reported that he showed the police where he'd thrown his pistol and was otherwise making no effort to hide what he'd done from them. His online activities in the weeks leading up to this terrorist attack he carried out indicate he'd given it a great deal of thought and preparation. Just a few hours before carrying out the attack, he posted a manifesto online, which included a great deal of material that would be familiar to anyone who follows the anti-Israel rhetoric that has become so widespread in recent years. This was not a spur-of-the-moment crime of passion. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it to make a point which he obviously thought would be met with widespread sympathy and perhaps even emulation. You know what? He might just get the death penalty, exactly what he deserves. Now, on the first point, I'm relieved to be able to tell you that he couldn't have been more wrong. His attack was condemned by almost everyone, including outspoken critics of Israel and Muslim community leaders all over the United States. The governments of several other countries, including Arab and Muslim majority countries, issued statements denouncing the attack. There were a few fringe voices that either made excuses for it or even praised it, but they were quickly deplatformed and otherwise ignored. That's the good news. The bad news is that his hope that there would be others who would take inspiration from his actions and emulate them will almost certainly come to pass. That is because the rhetoric that fueled the lunatic fantasies which drove Elias Rodriguez to carry out his murderous attack are still roaring through social media with no signs of slowing down. Now, to switch to commentary mode for a moment, friends, I am not optimistic for the future of Jews in the diaspora. Over the past several years, we've seen a massive surge in anti-Semitic attitudes and rhetoric worldwide, and not just Muslim-majority countries. In Western countries on both the far left and the far right, it has become very normalized, and that's begun to be the case even in more the mainstream left and right-wing circles. I won't even mention any names here, but I'm sure if you're watching this video, you probably know who I'm referring to. This intense and ubiquitous anti-Israel and anti-Semitic rhetoric was bound to result in bloodshed sooner or later. In fact, it's already resulted in bloodshed on the streets of European cities in the past several years. It should not surprise anyone that this phenomenon has now spread to the United States. We never thought it would, but nothing's impossible in these end times. According to the FBI, anti-Semitic hate crimes have increased in frequency in every major city in the United States, and I'm sure the same is true in Canada, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. These countries used to be collectively referred to as the free world that Israel was also very much a part of. But times change, and attitudes change, and cultural norms definitely change. The free world, as we call it, had the Bible as one of its core foundational building blocks. Even countries like France, which had an official policy of state secularism, still had a cultural foundation in the Bible. But that is rapidly fading in many Western countries, and what's taking its place in the hearts and minds of young people is what's called sometimes secular humanism. We don't have time to take a deep dive into this topic, but it's enough to say that secular humanism treats belief in the God of the Bible with scornful contempt. Since the modern Jewish state of Israel is a reminder of the faithfulness and power of that God and the reliability of the Bible, Israel and the Jewish people are deeply irritating to secular humanism. Seeing a country on the map with the name Israel and having cities with names like Beersheba, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Nazareth, and above all Jerusalem reminds these people of something they desperately want to forget. The reason so many Bible-believing Christians support Israel is the same reason so many secular humanists are against Israel, because this country is tangible, living proof that God is real and the Bible is true. So if the prophecies in this book pertaining to Israel, the Jews, and the city of Jerusalem are being fulfilled in our times, what other prophecies will soon be fulfilled? By the way, Jerusalem is mentioned over 800 times in Scripture. Now, a secular humanist will find these questions deeply disturbing, as well as irritating, and will rage against the answers they know are undeniable. That is why we're seeing on university campuses all over the world, in the halls of many governments, in public squares, and sadly, even in many churches. By the way, we just celebrated Jerusalem Day this week, the anniversary on the Hebrew calendar of the reunification of this city in 1967, the Six-Day War. That was definitely a prophetic event, and I remember it well, although I don't remember if it occurred to me at the time how unhappy secular people would be over something which made me so happy. By the way, I was bar mitzvahed that year. But all these years later, that thought is often on my mind. Now, all of that having been said, there are many other superficial issues that can point to that fuel anti-Semitism. But that's the core of it, and like I said, I think it's going to get much worse. The only good thing about all this is that it is already fueling a sharp rise in the number of Jewish people making Aliyah to Israel, which is what I did according to the Word of God in 1981. This trend was already visible before the October 7, 2023 attack, and it's rapidly growing. This is wonderful, but it also poses a lot of challenges. There's already a housing shortage in Israel, and large numbers of new immigrants will need some place to live. They'll also need jobs, schools for their children, hospitals, universities, and the list just goes on and on. I can remember in the early 1990s when the massive wave of Aliyah from the former Soviet republics came, over 1 million people in just a few years. That was hugely disruptive as well as very expensive. And to be very honest, 30 years later, we still haven't completely sorted out all of that. Now, with another wave of possibly comparable numbers coming from Western countries, we're going to need a lot of help to absorb them. So here at Vision for Israel, we're poised to do our part to help out in this process, just as we're already helping many families in Israel manage this difficult situation. So please watch this short video about our assistance programs and write me more about it. Whatever you want to know, just write and we'll do our best to answer your questions. We all know that since October 7th, 2023, Israel has faced really tremendous challenges, not only because of the death and destruction that happened along the southern border of Israel in many of our communities, but also across the northern border, to where at one point we had over 100,000 Israeli residents and citizens, both Jews and Arabs alike, who had to evacuate their homes. So it's been a very multi-layered challenge in order to meet the needs of the people of Israel. And that's where Vision for Israel has come to the forefront, networking together across the country with as many others as possible in order to meet the needs of people. And this is all from both security concerns to safety concerns to welfare concerns to even to the children who have lost their education and schooling. Welcome back. Now, before we move on, I want to acknowledge something that most of you probably already know, that Yaron Lishinsky and his girlfriend Sarah Milgram, they were believers in Yeshua the Messiah. My wife and I have known of Yaron's family for many years, and his father being a tour guide, and so we're personally very saddened by this terrible loss. I, along with many others, were looking forward to meeting Sarah and welcoming her into our community here in Israel. So people, they will both be greatly missed by all their friends and certainly their family and the wider community. However, just like the rest of Am Yisrael, we will carry on and even thrive. On that note, we're on to the next story about Operation Gideon's Chariots, the IDF incursion into the Gaza Strip with 5 active divisions with the goal of finishing off what's left of Hamas and bringing back all the remaining hostages. According to IDF reports, hundreds of Hamas operatives have already been eliminated, including several senior field commanders. Many more, especially among the relatively new recruits who are really just teenagers and only joined in the last few months because there's so few job opportunities in the Strip, have fled the battlefield and tried to blend in with the civilians moving towards designated safe zones in Rafiq and the Al-Malawi neighborhoods in Khan Yunis. The plan is for the IDF to take control of around 75% of the Gaza Strip, and this is estimated to require another 2 months, maybe less. Once this has been accomplished, the plan is for the IDF to demolish the remaining tunnels and other Hamas infrastructure and destroy what's left of Hamas forces. Amidst all of that, the IDF will distribute humanitarian aid to the civilian population to make sure it doesn't get stolen by Hamas. Also, the search for hostages and the pressure on Hamas to release them will continue, while the population hasn't done much to help, to be quite honest. if the hostages do get released, then the operation can be brought to a halt, although candidly, I think no one really believes that last part. This is a fight to the finish because everyone is tired of this war and wants it to end. But everyone also knows that it can't end with Hamas still in power and still holding the hostages. Now, on that note, I can't mention the fact that there is still a fierce internal debate within Israel about what the best way is to get the hostages back. A large percentage of Israelis believe that making a deal to give Hamas what they want, which is an end to the war and a further release of their security prisoners held in Israeli jails, is the way to go. Many people also believe that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is making decisions based not on what's best for the hostages or even the country, but rather what is likely to maintain his governing coalition so he can remain Prime Minister. Well, I will not make my own comment on this issue except to say that it really makes me sad to see what has happened in this country and the cynicism we seem to have developed in regards to our own political leadership. Netanyahu has made several mistakes, and so have others. But I don't believe the cynicism and distrust and even contempt that we're seeing is justified. It's certainly unhelpful, and it's profoundly unwise. We should remember that our enemies were watching our internal divisions before the October 7th, 2023 attack, and seeing us so divided at each other and grabbing each other's throats no doubt contributed towards their determination that it was a good time to hit us. One way or another, and in some ways it doesn't even matter why, this war is not over yet. And yet, in fact, the hardest part might be yet to come. I'll talk about that more in a moment. But first, I want to give a quick update on some of the other fronts, starting with the battle against Hezbollah in Lebanon. There have not been any rockets or drones fired into Israel from Lebanon in several months, and the internationally recognized government in Lebanon is getting more and more confident in confronting what's left of Hezbollah. At the same time, Israel occasionally still carries out strikes on Hezbollah operatives, and in the last week there were at least 2 such strikes on Hezbollah field commanders who appeared to be trying to reconstitute forces in southern Lebanon. I think it's likely that Lebanon's National Army is telling the IDF where they can find these guys. Kol hakavod, as we say, good going, guys. It makes perfect sense to me that they would do that so that the IDF can take out the really dangerous guys while the Lebanese army takes care of the lower level bad guys. That's the sort of division of labor that I can see both sides agreeing to. Meanwhile, back at the ranch next door in Lebanon, the regime of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani is also confronting Hezbollah, shutting down weapons smuggling routes, arresting operatives, and otherwise making it clear that Hezbollah is no longer welcome in Syria. Regime forces are also cracking down on Palestinian terrorist groups operating in the country, which was one of the conditions that U.S. President Donald Trump set for lifting Assad-era sanctions, something al-Jolani badly wants as he seeks to rebuild Syria's economy. Now, there's many other things that President Trump wants al-Jolani to do, and the last step in the process is for Syria to join the Abrahamic Accords and normalize relations with Israel. By the way, I want to suggest to all of you, read Isaiah chapter 19. Well, anyways, this would be an incredible, quite extraordinary thing if it ever gets that far. But there's all kinds of reasons why it might not. So I advise everyone to keep their expectations realistic. Al-Jolani is a strongman and a warlord, but he's not an all-powerful dictator. There is a limit to what he's able to order the forces in many of his factions in that coalition, which are deeply hostile to Israel. Now, al-Jolani himself has made statements indicating that he does not like the fact that the IDF has established a buffer zone on Syrian territory and taken complete control of the Golan Heights, and that he expects someday to see the IDF leave these positions. Personally, I think that on some level he knows how unlikely that is, but he has to at least go through the motions of making these kinds of statements. It's all part of the games we play in the Middle East, for better and for worse. And if any of you guys remember playing the game Risk, I used to play it all the time. You can check it out online. Now, finally, there are the Houthis. Where are they? They're still active. They're in Yemen. This proxy of Iran still fires ballistic missiles at us, sometimes twice, but usually just once every 24 hours. This past week, millions of Israelis were once again forced to run for shelter as alarms wailed in communities all over the country. Someday the sirens will wail in Israel for the last time, but that day is unlikely to come soon. Even if the Houthis stop shooting at us, there is likely to be rockets from somewhere else, possibly Iran, coming at us sooner or later. That is why here at Vision for Israel, we've been placing bomb safety shelters in communities all over the country for several years now. Our target goal in the immediate future is 500, so you can make this possible. Now, these shelters are placed in public areas like bus stops and near sports fields so that when the siren wails, even people who are nowhere near a building with a designated sheltered space can quickly get inside and find safety. So please watch this short video. Vision for Israel has been installing bomb safety shelters since actually around the fall of 2021. During that year, there was a barrage of rockets that came into southern Israel, particularly by the terrorist group known as Hamas, and Israel had to find a way further in order to protect its citizens, its residents across the southern part of Israel. And so we sprung into action. We felt like this was a project that we had a personal invitation to fulfill. And it's important because when these projectiles, these missiles, these rockets, whatever that is that's thrown at Israel by its enemies, there is not only the potential for somebody being killed instantly, but also there's tremendous collateral damage and people that get wounded even from shrapnel. And so if you place a safety shelter at a bus stop or in front of a high school or community center or a kindergarten or any kind of facility that's publicly accessible, the people can run into these shelters. The children can run and find safety in them and be protected from a rocket that lands and shrapnel is scattered, which could be mortally wounding people. So it gives not only a physical protection of security, but also an emotional sense of security that you know having a shelter that you can run to in the street, outside of a store, somewhere publicly accessible, not just in someone's home, but out in the open, gives a sense of security. And I always believe that it's important for us to refer to Scripture. And Psalm 91, the whole chapter talks about God providing us a shelter. And we have seen amazing deliverances from enemy rockets as a result. And now we've installed over 400 shelters across the southern and northern borders of Israel. And they weigh 30,000 kilos each, or that's 30 tons. And it's a lot of weight on rebar and concrete that's been specially mixed, and also with a special metal ramp that allows physically impaired people to be able to come up in a walker or a wheelchair on a moment's notice. In many of these areas, residents don't have any longer than between 5 seconds to maximum 45 seconds to get into a shelter to be protected. Welcome back, friends. This is VFI News. Don't forget, go to our website, www.visionforisrael.com. Now, we're coming to the end of the program, so I just want to quickly run through some of the other big stories making headlines in Israel this week. To start with, there was another round of negotiations between the United States and Iran on Friday. This time they were in Rome, and the U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff had to leave early for some reason. The talks only lasted a few hours, and both sides emerged saying some unspecified progress had been made. Candidly, I don't believe that at all, because other Iranian officials quickly reiterated all of the Ayatollah regime's standard maximalist positions. They won't give up uranium enrichment. They won't even discuss their ballistic missile program or their support for terrorist groups, to say nothing of their involvement in narcotics trafficking in Latin America. They say that America is insolent for even bringing these things up. And last but not least, they make endless threats to crush Israel like an empty soda pop can if we so much as sneeze in their direction. Shoo, bless you. In short, friends, this is becoming a theater of the absurd, and I'm even going to say that President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, is either being played or he's allowing it to look that way because it's better than the obvious alternative that everyone knows is necessary. President Trump campaigned on a promise of ending wars, not starting them. And even though striking Iran is absolutely necessary, it would give his critics a chance to say he broke that promise, so he'd rather not do it. These talks give him an excuse to put off an attack, but there have been credible reports that Israel is making preparations and is ready to attack on its own. There's no way to know what will happen next if Israel takes that step, but one thing I do not worry about much is the Iranian threats of a counterattack. Those guys do a lot of talking, and I'm sure they've got ballistic missiles which can challenge our defense systems and maybe even inflict serious damage. But I also have no doubt that they are far more vulnerable than we are, and the regime in Tehran is at least as vulnerable to internal subversion as the Assad regime in Syria proved to be. There's a lot more I could say about this subject, but we're almost out of time, so I will now briefly hit a couple more topics and then end with the traditional bit of good news. Good news. Yes, I like good news. Yet another large forest fire broke out in the hills just west of Jerusalem last Monday afternoon, but this did not interfere in Jerusalem Day festivities. This is the anniversary on the Hebrew calendar of the reunification of Jerusalem during the Six-Day War in 1967. By the way, and it's a clue of my age, I was bar mitzvahed that summer right around that time. Well, Spain has raised the possibility of sanctions on Israel to try and force an end to the war in Gaza. This follows the United Kingdom's suspension of talks towards a free trade agreement and similar measures by the EU and some of the largest economies in the bloc. Speaking of Hamas, the terrorist group has resorted to ever more draconian policies to try and keep its grip on power over the residents of the Strip. This includes public executions of those it accuses of collaborating with Israel or looting humanitarian aid trucks. I guess they think they're the only ones allowed to steal food, but if anyone else does it, that's a capital offense. Finally, friends, we're at the end of the report, so I'll end with the traditional good news. And don't forget, there's even better news. It's called the good news of the gospel of the kingdom. So you need to read up on Scripture and find out what it is. Well, this week, the al-Jolani regime, in a goodwill gesture towards President Trump, released to Israel the records pertaining to Eli Cohen. You have to read the book, Our Man in Damascus. He was an Israeli spy who worked in Damascus for years, sending vital intelligence to Israel. He was exposed and executed in 1965, and now his family and the Mossad have all the files about him that Syrian intelligence kept secret for the past 60 years. Well, until next week, friends, I'm Barry Segal, your friend. I'm praying for all of you. I hope you'll pray for me as well. And this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel. Shalom and God bless you.